Welcome, Erica. It's so nice to have you here for this conversation. And it's really nice as a divorce attorney to speak to a parenting expert. And what I really want to talk about today to help people is parenting plans, which, as you probably know, in divorce, it's like you fight over the money or you fight over the kids. And I really want to come into this as I came into divorce from the child perspective. So one thing I thought might be helpful is if we can talk about the different stages of development for children, because I'm assuming what's good for maybe a 14-year-old is different than, a 3-year-old. Maybe if we could just break down stages of development so people can think about these ideas. And I want to go through each stage and think of the optimal parenting plan for each stage.
Well, let's start at the beginning, which is in the 0 to 3 stage, what we call the first critical window of brain development for children, where their right brain or their social emotional brain is developing at light speed, right? So by the end of 3 years of age, 85% of a child's right brain is developed. And the right brain is responsible for things like emotional regulation and resilience to stress, and the ability to read social cues and other things that are important, like executive functioning and working memory and all kinds of good things. But the point is that the way that we help children to develop a sense of emotional security that is tied to all of that right brain development is to have sensitive, empathic nurturing from their primary attachment figure. And there really is only one primary attachment figure. It's usually the mother, but not always today. And now there are gay couples where there is no mother, where there's 2 fathers, or, but generally, even when there's 2 fathers, or there's 2 mothers, or, there's a mother and a grandmother, or whatever family configuration you come from, there is a primary attachment figure. So John Bowlby, the father of attachment, said the primary attachment figure is the person who is there to soothe the baby in distress from moment to moment throughout the day, the one who is there the majority of the time for that child. And so there really is one. I mean, I know that there's a lot of to-do in courts today about there being multiple, 50-50 and even Steven, and it doesn't matter. And I could tell you stories about high conflict divorces where people treat children like possessions, right? But if we really recognize who is that primary who is the go-to person for that baby when they're in distress, not the playful parent. It's not usually the playful parent, because usually the father is what we call playful tactile stimulation. But it can be the father that is the primary attachment figure if the mother is out working and the father is home. So we really want to identify very quickly who is the primary attachment figure. And that person really needs to have, in the first 3 years, I would say that isn't the time to split the baby like King Solomon said, how do we split the baby? And so I would really be sensitive. The divorces the high conflict divorces that I have worked with very young children, I always advise, I say, let the primary attachment figure be there particularly the sleepovers. Let the baby stay with the mother. If the mother's breastfeeding, absolutely don't take that baby away from a breastfeeding mother. But come during the day, be the parent who comes and plays and takes the baby out and spends lots of time and cares for the baby. But sleep time is a very important emotional security time. So maybe in the first 3 years, don't think about sleepovers. Think about the sleepovers starting maybe towards the end of the 2nd year into the 3rd year. Then you can start to talk about incrementally bringing in sleepovers. So that's the first thing I would think about, that there is a primary attachment figure. You don't want to yank that baby away from that figure, because you can do a lot of emotional damage to that child. And it has long-term repercussions, meaning when you interrupt attachment security in the first 3 years, it can lead to things like depression, anxiety, ADHD symptoms, personality disorders. And I don't want to scare people, but mental health is tied to emotional security. So moving on. What do
Well,
you
but
do?
before you do that, Erica, I just
Yeah.
want to make sure I understand. So for the
Sure.
first 1,000 days,
Yes.
and I saw that in your book. I like that first 1,000 days.
Yes.
Okay, so you believe in having a primary attachment figure. Since you went into a little bit more depth than I thought you were, you did say that there should be some overnights at the second year.
I'm saying really moving into the third year. So, if a baby is 2.5 and the father or the parent who's not the primary attachment figure is spending lots of time with the baby, coming and having, days with the baby, taking the baby out, playing with the baby. You could even do pretend sleep, so in other words, coming and helping bathe the baby, put the baby to sleep. It depends on the amicability of the divorce. When you have a healthy co-parenting situation, you can have nesting arrangements. I always say nesting is good in the first 3 years, because nesting implies that the non-primary attachment figure comes to the house and gives the bath and so you're not yanking this baby away from the bath they're used to, or the apartment they're used to, or the home they're used to. So that's the best. So we're going to talk about the ideal. We always want to talk about the ideal, don't we, Corey? We want to start with the ideal and then we want to go down from there. So the idea of nesting, where the baby is really stable in a certain situation, but the parents can come into that baby's environment, and in the case of the non-attachment figure parent, coming and playing with the baby and coming back and bathing the baby and even putting the baby to sleep, just not pulling the baby away from that attachment figure, which is usually the mother. And there's terrible stories where I've been asked to be an expert witness, where fathers are so angry about losing their children, and they feel that they're losing their children, that they demand from the courts 50-50, and they literally will tear a breastfeeding baby away from its mother and say, that baby is half mine, as if the baby's a possession, as if they're not really thinking about the psychology of that baby and what that baby needs. So let's put our babies first and say, what does that baby need to feel emotionally secure, and where do I fit in?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's the first 1,000 days. When you were telling me this, and you did say we're working with the ideal, and you did say a healthy parent, a healthy co-parenting relationship with nesting, obviously having someone come into your home. I mean, that has to be pretty healthy. In a higher conflict situation for the first 1,000 days, I'm assuming nesting is not going to work. But would you change the dynamic of any of the parenting time for that first 1,000 days, or it's about the same, except maybe just a little bit more space between those two parents so they won't kill each other, metaphorically?
Yeah, I mean, if it's not as amicable, then the idea is for, as much as possible for, for the non-primary parent to be able to spend as much time with that baby as they want and as they can. But the idea being that particularly sleep time there are articles written about nighttime security being even more important than daytime security for babies. And daytime security is very important for babies. So I just want you to think about the fact that you have a primary attachment figure. When you're in distress, that's your go-to person. That's your, touchstone kind of thing of security. So you can be away from that person for a little while. You can be away from that person for an hour or two, and it feels like a loss, but you can handle it. I'm a baby and I can handle that. I miss my mommy, but I can handle it. I know I'm going to see my mommy later. But you take that baby for hours and days and overnights away from their primary attachment figure. That baby becomes fearful, disoriented, sad, angry. It's a tremendous loss for that baby. So I wish more parents would actually empathize with their babies, would put themselves. There was a great book years ago written by Daniel Stern, who wrote a book about putting words to a baby's psyche, right? Because babies can't speak, right? So I always think that I speak for the babies. You know how they, in the Dr. Seuss book, I speak for the truffula trees. I speak for the babies, right? So the concept is, if you put yourself in that baby's shoes emotionally, I think it would be better for our children if the center of our actions had to do with the well-being of the babies.
Okay, so for the first 1,000 days, we're having the primary parent
Right.
having most of the time. Nighttime security is really important. It doesn't sound like there's many overnights for the first or second year. Just breaking that down a little bit more, does that mean that the non-primary parent who hears this, and maybe, as you said, is it a more difficult divorce, maybe wants 50-50 initially, maybe that's what they heard the courts are moving towards. But let's assume that they accept this and they're like, okay, I'll work with what Erica's saying. She's the expert. I'll listen, which is wonderful if people listen to experts. But here's the thing. What does that look like? Is that like a daily 2 hours a day? Is it like 30 minutes a day? What are you seeing? Because sometimes I see, obviously judges are all over the map on this, depending on their own personal views and biases.
Right.
But as an expert, what does the research shows? And if we were going to do it right, come to you and we say, okay, we will agree with your philosophy for the first 1,000 days. But you know what? Right now I see my baby every day, maybe not all the time because I'm at work. But now you're telling me I can't see my baby really at all? Or that's at least what I'm hearing. What does that actually look like? And that will give me comfort, I think, as a parent who's hearing this. What would you say to that parent?
Well, I mean, I think if you think practically, the non-primary attachment figure probably didn't see the baby more than a couple of hours a day anyway, because they were working out in the world. So I think the idea that yeah, they should be able to have access to their, listen, again, if we talk about the ideal co-parenting where you live close by, with older children, I was about to talk about older children, where you can still walk your child to school or do homework with your child, pick them up at school and do homework with them and have supper with them. I mean, it's the idea of fitting into your child's life rather than making your child fit into your life. And, I always use this analogy, and I would say this is across the board, from infancy through adolescence. Children need you to adapt to them rather than making them adapt to you. So the healthiest mothers with very young infants are not the ones who make the baby crawl into the niche of their neck and find a comfort area, are the mothers who find a way to make the baby who adapt to the baby to make the baby feel comfortable. That's my metaphor for the podcast, is instead of making your child fit into your needs, you fit into your child's needs. And what children need is stability, constancy. They need not to be shuffled around like a sack of potatoes. And they really need for you to adapt to their needs for security and constancy and not breaking their routines. So it's hard because as adults, we get scared. We get scared that we're losing, there is loss involved with divorce. But if you handle this well, you won't lose your children. If you handle this badly and selfishly and narcissistically, guess what? You will lose your children. That's a guarantee. But if you handle this generously and securely, so I can just give you an example without using names. I'm not giving away any confidences. I'm writing about this case in a book that I'm writing about divorce. As you know, Corey, I'm writing this book about raising healthy children through a very sometimes difficult divorces. The best and healthiest case that I ever worked on was of a couple with 3 children. And the father was not the primary attachment figure, the mother was. And the father recognized that, maybe because he was in psychodynamic psychotherapy with a psychoanalyst for so many years. But the idea is that he recognized, this is not good for my children, for me to pull them away for overnights. Let me see what works for them. I always walk them to school. Let me still walk them to school. I used to do math homework with them. Let me still do math homework with them. I would have supper with each of them individually once a week, even before the divorce. Let me continue to do that. Let me spend Saturdays with them every Saturday. So this was a father who didn't say, mine, mine, mine. And he actually looked at what the children needed, which is they needed to feel that their home was the stable home. And slowly, incrementally, he introduced his home and his apartment and, and these were older children, But even with older children, he didn't force the idea of overnights right away. He said, we will move into this. We will incrementally, when you feel secure, I'm going to make your bedrooms beautiful. We will incrementally move into this. You know, that's an admirable case, you know, and that was a parent, and these children did very well.
Just to clarify, on the first stage, that first 1,000 days, are you
Yeah.
saying that it's okay for the non-primary parent to have daily or almost daily visit?
That's what I mean, in a way, if parents can be amicable, that would be the best. The best would be, you know, you can still walk them to school. I'll pick
Well,
them up.
you keep on saying school, but I want to limit it to the first
Oh,
1,000.
the very little. Yes.
Yeah.
So the first 1,000 days, absolutely. I mean, whatever time you spent with that baby, if it's amicable, you should still be able to see your baby. That baby still needs to have a relationship
On a daily basis.
on a daily basis.
Okay, now,
Fathers-
Erica, if it's more high conflict, where this is going to be a challenge,
Yeah.
it's a logistical issue. I'm assuming daily is not ideal. I'm assuming nesting is not ideal. What would you suggest in that situation?
So we're working from ideal to less ideal. Less
Yeah.
ideal would be still not having overnights, but having certain prescribed days during the week when you get to spend with your baby. And listen, again, that non-primary parent is probably still working, but if, the idea is, after work, you get to take the baby to the park and go to the swings and play with the baby, and maybe bring the baby, if it's conflict that we're talking about, bring the baby back to your apartment, feed the baby, play with the baby, but then bring the baby back to sleep at their primary guardianship kind of residence.
Yeah, I think judges do that in my cases a few times a week, like 3 times a week, a few hours.
Yep.
That's what I've seen.
And then weekends. And then on the weekend, have a day, one day that is your day, where you get to really be with your baby, play with your baby, care for your baby. And, again, be sensitive to the fact that very sensitive infants, emotionally fragile, emotionally sensitive babies, and there are a lot of those who are more susceptible to stress, can bear less time away from their primary attachment figure. So again, if you're sensitive as a person and you tune into what your baby needs, you can see when the baby's in distress. This idea of grabbing the baby and the baby's in terrible distress and saying, I'm taking that baby's mine. I'm going to the park with that baby. That's my baby. You're doing it for you. You're not doing it for that child.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to say about this first 1,000 days as we move into the second stage?
I would say just that. Just if you can, for the good of that child, give up on overnights and let that child use that primary attachment figure the way that they need to, and you be that loving, non-primary attachment figure who's playful and playfully stimulating and still loves and cares for that baby and has a deep attachment to that baby. But it's really letting go of those overnights in the first 3 years.
Okay, well, let me just give a devil's advocate type of point of view, which in some of these cases are more high conflict cases. And let's say you do have the primary parent, and we don't know the quality of the care, but we're assuming the quality of the care of the primary parent is good. We're not going to talk about neglect. That's a different type of situation.
That's a different situation.
Okay. But let's just say it's a good enough parent, maybe not the best parent, because there is no best. I understand from reading your books. But they're good enough parent, working through their own issues. But let's say now they realize they have most of the time, except for a few hours a day, even in healthy situations. What do you think if the primary parent says, I'll just outsource this parenting, I have all this obligation, I can't now really work. What happens if I outsource it to either, a nanny or a grandparent or childcare, and then the non-custodial parent or non-primary parent says, listen, the primary parent's not even taking care of the child during the day. What would you say in that situation?
I would say the same thing, which is if you're doing what's best for your child, let's think. I'll put it back on you, Corey. Okay. What's best for that child? Is it best to be with their primary attachment figure or to be with a surrogate attachment figure?
Oh.
It gets a little bit gray if we're talking about a grandmother. Is that grandmother really, it's still, the grandmother's still not their primary attachment figure. So again, it gets into this area of possession, right? So they say possession is 9/10 of the law, or that's what they used to say. I don't know if that's a legal term or if that's just an expression, but the idea that I possess this baby's mine. I can do whatever I want with this baby. I can let whoever can care for it. This baby's in my possession now, because that's what it's about. It's about possession. And if we give up that idea of children being our possessions, because they're not really our possessions. There's a wonderful poem about how children are in our care by the grace of God, but they're not our possessions. We're fortunate and privileged to be able to care for them. They're on loan to us, but they are not our possessions.
Yeah.
And so if we give up that idea of possessiveness and we say, what's best for that baby? If that mother, who's the primary attachment figure, wants to be with that baby and I can't be with that baby, do I keep that baby in my possession because that baby is mine to do with what I want? I can get a babysitter. I can, or do I let the mother care for that baby? Right. And then we get into how secure is that non-primary attachment parent? How secure is that parent? The more secure parents are emotionally, the more secure they are as individuals, and the more secure they are in their position as parents, the better they are at parenting, right? The less secure, the more defensive, the more paranoid, the more possessive.
Yeah, I love that thought, and that is like carries over for like outside of parenting, just being secure and not being defensive, being able to be within yourself when emotions come up that are difficult to manage. All right, so let's go to stage 2. What would you say after the first 1,000 days? What grouping would you say in years are we talking about now?
Well, we're really talking school years. So they start to go to preschool and then primary school. So we would say 4 through 9. 9 is when adolescence officially starts. So 9 to 25 is adolescence. And even then, adolescence is broken up into 3 parts, early, middle, and late adolescence. But let's say adolescence starts at 9. So we're really talking 3 to 9.
Okay. And what do you call that? Is there a term for that?
Yeah, I mean, I call them the school years, but the primary school, but Freud called it the latency period. It's not really latency anymore. We know that. So I just call it the primary school years.
Okay, so in the primary school years, we have now probably you're going to transition, if we followed your advice, from having a primary parent. Are we moving now after some step up to, are you recommending a 50-50 or what are you recommending then?
It depends on the child. Again, if you look to your child to see what your child is capable of, some children are capable of true 50-50, as long as it's not a shock to those children, as long as you're doing it incrementally and sensitively. You've heard of the term weaning, right? And most people think of it as weaning from breastfeeding, but weaning is also separating. So as children start to go to school, whether it's preschool at 3, 4, and then kindergarten 5, first grade 6, as they start to go to school, what they're doing is they're practicing separating from their primary attachment figure, and they're learning to rely on other people for security as well. They have now internalized, if you do it right, in the first 3 years, they've internalized a sense of emotional security. And so they go out into the world more capable of exploring, of taking risks, of being a little more separate. They still have to go home and touch base, and that goes straight through adolescence. There's still the use of, but what changes is that they can use not just the primary parent, but now the non-primary parent. I always say fathers become much more important at around 2.5 to 3. Because children want to explore more. They want to take risks more. And fathers encourage a little more risk-taking, a little more exploration. They're more playful. And they also kind of encourage a little more separation from the primary attachment figure, right? So if you have 2 gay fathers, you might have one gay father who is playing the mother role and one gay father who's playing the father role. So they're generally, whether it's a man and a woman or 2 women or 2 men, generally you see a separation, right? It sort of naturally, organically happens, not always. And when it doesn't always happen organically, I actually step in and help them to make it happen non-organically. that there's a parent who's saying, come on, let's go, let's play. So because children can be a little more separate, then you can start to introduce the idea of, being with daddy for the weekend, or being with mommy if mommy's the non-primary parent for the weekend, or staying overnight. Let's start with one night at daddy's house or mommy's house. I'll be non-gender specific here. Whoever's the non-primary parent, let's try one night, and and maybe even the idea of longer periods of time with that parent. But as you know, there's different configurations that the court and lawyers come up with. There's the 5 and 14, and there's all kinds of configurations. I think the idea is whatever works for you and your ex-spouse, I think, is important. But to know that children can start to be a little more separate, and they can start to get support from grandmothers, from teachers, from other people, start to give them support and security.
Well, the issue I see is, one parent usually is much more optimistic about, these changing these stages, moving quicker to 50-50, and the other parent is much more resistant. And unfortunately, if people go to court, it really seems to be up to the judge. I think I know your answer. It's going to be up to the child. But if a couple was going to hire you or someone like you, how would you determine who's right? Because one parent's going to be, and I think they literally believe it is too fast to do anything more than what's going on now. And the other parent feels as strongly. So if you're looking at a little 40-year-old, how do you determine what is objective as opposed to just a subjective determination, which is, I think, really what the courts usually do, at least in these conferences, the conferences where the judges just tell you what their feelings are. Obviously, if we had a hearing and had an expert come in, that's a different story. But I've never had a conference with an expert in there. Maybe we should, but that's a whole different story. So how do you determine who's right, who's wrong, and just a little bit more clarity for these parents? Because I think it is a big problem.
I believe that parents who are going through high conflict divorces should be, this may not go over so well with a lot of listeners, but I believe that there should be a mandate that parents are in parent guidance. Parent coordination is different than parent guidance, just to be clear.
Yeah.
Parent coordination is different than forensics. So I know it's all confusing. All these terms.
No, this is so helpful. And I think you're really deep diving now. And and I love that term, parent guidance, because I think that is a more accurate term.
Yeah. So parent guidance is really helping parents to put their children first. It's really helping parents to see through their children's eyes, and therefore helping parents to make the best decisions together, keeping their child in mind. And I can do that with the majority of, I've stepped into very high conflict situations, and I can do that with the majority of parents. There's always that, 10 or 20% that I can't work with, because they are so very angry that what rises to the surface more than anything is just their rage and sense of abandonment in the marital situation. And so they're seeing white hot rage. They're not thinking about their children. In that moment, they are literally in, states of an inability to really think about their children. But for the majority of cases, let's say 8 out of 10 cases that I see, parent guidance really, really, really helps parents. We know the difference, right? Forensics is really to determine very tragic and often difficult situations, right? To look at issues of neglect or abuse, or it's usually called into these high conflict situations. Parent coordination is to help you coordinate schedules, and they're usually your mediator secretary kind of thing. But parent guidance is a thing apart. And I often think in these divorce situations, it should be mandated by the court. They're like parenting classes. Parent guidance is like having to take a parenting class. If you are struggling, judges should be able to say you have to go to parent guidance and take some parenting classes. Because the judge should be able to say, I don't feel that you're able to see what's best for your child here, you're both so fixed on winning and not really what's best for your child.
Erica, I love that. And I was just thinking how the next evolution of our court system, having these conferences, not necessarily before a judge who could be there in the background, but literally mandating it before a parent guidance expert. And like we come to you working within the court system, and you're basically now not coming with your own biases, but your own research, your own experience for 20, 30 years of doing this, as opposed to a judge that might have just gotten elected, no experience maybe in this area. Maybe they're a parent, but that doesn't mean they know everything. And I just feel it would help so many more people to deal with it. I think in the collaborative context, when you're out of court or in mediation, you can obviously do a parenting guidance. What I've seen in courts, at least in New York, is just like the parents are required to do one class. And I'm thinking, if I want to become good at something, like if I want to take, learn how to play tennis, and I have to take one class, I ain't going to get that much better. And I think you're totally right that the people who have the highest conflict need the most help. And one 4-hour class, one 8-hour class ain't going to do it. It needs to be repetitive, just like therapy. It happens over time. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with it entirely. I mean, I think that I think the courts have more power than they really maybe utilize. I'm not sure why there's a lot of fear about kind of stepping up. I mean, some of the judges feel out of their depths. I know that. I wrote my first book hoping that it would get into the legal system, hoping that lawyers, and in fact, some lawyers wrote me after I wrote my first book, which was called Being There, Why Prioritizing Motherhood in the First 3 Years Matters. And it's all about that attachment period. They read it and they wrote me and they said, this was so helpful. I wish more judges knew about this. And I'll just tell you a brief story. I don't think I'm giving anything away, and I don't think I'll reveal anything that is breaking confidence. But I was called into a case where a judge knew so little about attachment and what was good for babies emotionally that he literally said, this baby who is breastfeeding at the time, had to go 50-50 to the father. That meant 50-50 overnights, even though this baby had never been apart from this mother for an overnight for, 6 months and had the baby on his knee and said, see this baby, if I give this baby candy, this baby will attach to me.
So, yeah.
So
that's what
again,
we're dealing with.
What do you do with that? I mean, what do you do with that? The fact that this is a judge, this is an intelligent, educated person who clearly never took a psychology course in college. And I'm thinking, and this is the person in family court that's making decisions about the well-being of this baby? Now, most judges aren't that ignorant. Most judges are not. But, I think if you're out of your depth, it's so important. If you're a therapist of a certain kind and you can't handle a case, then it's your responsibility to say, I'm out of my depth with this. I need this kind of therapist to handle this. If you're a lawyer and you are a tax attorney and somebody comes to you about family law, it's your responsibility to say, I'm a tax attorney. I'm not a family lawyer. Go see this family lawyer. Judges have to be careful that they are not making decisions about children without the help of experts in this field of parenting and psychology. That I'll say.
No, I totally resonates. It resonates so much. But smarter judges who are funny would say, just because I wear a black robe, I might not know best. This is your child. You guys know better. Do whatever you guys need to. Hire someone like you. Figure it out. But if I got to make decisions, we're going to do it a certain way. And as you said, they're probably going to appoint a forensic. And it becomes a real battle, really about throwing each parent under the bus, even though both parents are probably decent enough. The question I always ask my clients who really try to fight this is, if, God forbid, you died, God forbid, could the other parent take care of the child? Maybe not as good as you. And if they say, yeah, they can do it, I'm like, that's not really what this court's about. If then it's really talking to, as you said, a parenting guidance, trying to figure out something that works best for children. But this is not really taking a child away from someone. And that's not what the courts, is set up for.
I think it's the whole concept. I really do think it's this concept of possession, that children are viewed like a house or a car, or, they really are. In the court system, in the legal system, children are considered possessions, but they're not possessions. They're children.
Well, I mean, they are moving to the best interest standard, whatever that means. But I hear you. They're also doing that for pets as well. All right. So, one thing in this primary school age area that comes up, let's say we're transitioning from a primary parent to a more equal time. We talked about ramping up, and it might depend. Both parents are not going to be happy equally. But one thing I've seen is even if we do a 50-50, what is the right 50-50? Because you could do week on, week off. Let's assume the parents live together, and let's assume healthy-ish relationship. Are you in favor of the week on, week off model? Are you favoring 5 days away? I've seen that. Then I've seen every other day, which to me, that might be a little jarring for a child. So is there any research on this of what's the best, or are you just telling me it depends?
Right. So no, I won't just tell you it depends. Okay. The younger the child, and now we're talking about primary school age, the younger the child, the more stability and constancy in terms of their primary home is important. And so what that means is school is hard. School is stressful. Even when you're little, school is stressful. You have to transition, which is really hard for young children under the age of 9. And if you have a sensitive child, everybody who's listening to this will understand what I mean. Waking up in the morning, going from home to school, going back from school to home or any other activity after school, winding down the day and transitioning to bath time and bedtime, and then going to sleep. These are all what we call transitions. And then there's other transitions like summer vacation or going on vacation and coming back from vacation and changing schools. And there's other bigger transitions. But let's just talk about the daily transitions. And it's interesting because as a Jew, I can tell you that we have a blessing and a prayer for every single transition in life. So Jews have always been very sensitive to transitions. We wake up, we say, thank you for waking, God, for I'm waking up. Thank you for this meal that I'm eating. Thank you for letting me walk out the door. I mean, everything has a blessing or a prayer. So the concept is transitions are very hard for children. So what we want to do is minimize the disruption, right, with young children. You're asking me let's start with the ideal. The ideal is that a child can go to sleep and wake up in their same bed during the week when it's most stressful for them. So if you're going to have overnights as the non-primary parent, then I would suggest your overnights be on the weekends, when children aren't as stressed about leaving and going and coming and staying and right? They're not having to separate from you, right? You can wake up with them and feed them pancakes and go to the park and take them to a birthday party, right? It's much less stressful. And so I always say that if in an ideal world, both parents recognize, okay, which is going to be their place during the week that they sleep, right? So if it's going to be at mommy's house, so then the father comes and takes them to dinner on Tuesdays and Thursdays, or picks them up at school, and they go to daddy's house and they do homework and they have supper and they can even do bath time and get into their pajamas. And then they can walk down the street or 2 blocks or get into the cab and go back home and sleep at home. That's still the ideal. And then save the sleepovers for the weekends when they don't have the stress and they don't have the routine of school. That's the ideal. Does anybody listen to me about that? Rarely, sometimes, and those kids do the best.
Right. Well, that's presupposing a lot, but I think you're right. If we're going to put the children first, we're going to live close by, and we're going to have this ability. And if you don't live in the city, to just live in the neighborhood, I've seen that all the time. Obviously, could be a cost factor. A lot of divorces idea was someone has to move well outside of their normal neighborhood because it was expensive enough to deal with one home in that area, and now they can't. But we talked ideal, and I think that to me sounds less stressful. It does sound less stressful. I was just putting myself in that child's situation. All right, so let's say now we have, let's say we don't have such a close living. Maybe they're half an hour away or 45 minutes away.
Right. So what you're trying to do is reduce the time between that they don't see, that they're not seeing either parent. So a lot of these configurations, 3 and 4, 2 and 5, a lot of them have to do with, the good ones have to do with reducing the amount of time. Think of weaning again, reducing the amount of time where you haven't seen daddy, reducing the amount of time where you're not going to see mommy, or in an alternative family situation where I'm not getting to see daddy and daddy or mommy and mommy, right? But the concept is reducing the amount of time between. So, you have to think, if you live far away, then I suppose the idea of having 2 days a week with one overnight during the middle of the week when you're with your child. So then they're not missing mommy for more than 24 to 36 hours. They get to see mommy again, right? And so it's kind of common sense, Corey, if you think about it. If parents put their children first and they were empathic and put themselves into their children's feelings, they would say, right, I would want to see, if I was used to seeing my mommy, I would want to not be away from my mommy for more than 2 days, right? If I'm used to seeing my daddy, I would not want to be away from my daddy for more than 2 days.
Okay, but what I'm thinking with that is you have a lot of transitions.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying this is a healthier situation. Mm-hmm. The transitions are not stressful. So the only time the transition seems to become more of an issue is where the parents are more in conflict. And if that's the case, what takes priority? Do you take the priority of reducing the conflict with the parents, or do you still stay with the priority of not having that much time away from either parent?
Well, I hate to say it's sort of like the lesser of two evils, right?
Yeah.
And I would hope that if you could work with parents, they could reduce their conflict and see the benefit to children. Obviously, I'm going to say that children living around intense conflict. I mean, you're saying in the handoff, meaning if the parents are fighting over this, is it better to give up some control?
Well, I don't necessarily. I think it sort of seems to be a Cold War. There's just negative feelings. So when we say fighting, I don't want you to think there's some blow up, but there's obviously a lot of tension.
Yeah.
Which, as you know better than me, which is probably absorbed by the child. Now, I'm just, what I've seen is maybe try to do the exchanges where they don't really come in contact with the parents.
Yeah, you mean the handoffs, the transitions, the handoffs. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So I have a few suggestions for parents about handoffs and transitions. So one thing I say to parents is, make sure that they have transitional objects that are always with them. Make sure they have duplicates of their transitional objects. If they have my kids had a green hippo. My daughter had a green hippo. I had 3 of those same smelly green hippos. They were exactly the same. And I made sure that they stunk all the same. They smelled it. I never washed them because you can't wash your children's transitional objects. Don't wash your children's blankies and hippos and bears. Because that's part of the security for them. We are all animals after all. And so make sure that their transitional objects are with them. Make sure that, if parents are generous, again, and put their children first, they say, this child is used to being with our family dog. The family dog goes with the child.
Great idea.
Wherever the child goes, the puppy goes, the dog goes, or the cat goes, or whatever. The babysitter, wherever the child goes, the nanny goes.
Yeah, I've seen that. Those are great things.
Because the nanny ends up being now we're talking about a certain class of people here, right, that can afford a nanny. The babysitter ends up being a certain kind of transitional object, as much consistency as possible. Mommy can't go into daddy's house, but the babysitter can go wherever the baby goes. The dog goes wherever the baby goes. The blankie and the bear go wherever the baby goes. The pictures of mommy, if you're leaving mommy, or the pictures of daddy, if you're leaving daddy. go wherever that child goes. Whatever is a transitional object to that child goes. The more consistency, the better. So that means the only thing they need to cope with the loss of is that parent. And that's the greatest loss of all. The other thing that you can do is make their rooms so incredibly similar. Same bed, same bedding, same clothing, same toys. Don't reinvent the wheel. Make it as similar as possible.
Wow, that would be wonderful if co-parents would do that. That's a great idea. I haven't heard that, to make it as similar as possible. That is fantastic. Okay, well, let's move. I know we've done the primary school ages, and maybe it doesn't change that much, because now I think we're in the 9 to 13 from your book. I think it was early adolescence. Is 9 to 13. Is there any differences between the 4 to 9? Okay, so what are the differences that parents should be thinking about?
So in adolescence, both parents are really important. It's interesting because it really shifts, and it shifts because, parents are different and they serve different needs to kids. And, kids use their parents. Sometimes they'll use one parent to separate from the other parent, or this parent to separate from that parent. So oftentimes parents will complain if they have adolescents that, my son is closer to my husband and I don't understand why. And I'm like, well, because your son is a boy and that's your husband. And that's his ego ideal. He's modeling, he's connecting, he's identifying with his father. He's particularly needing his father at this point in development. It's normal for boys to want to be with their fathers a lot, or for girls to want to be with their mothers a little more. Now, this is in normal, healthier situations. I mean, you can have a situation where a mother or a father is imbalanced or mentally ill or negligent or not present or unstable. And then we have a different story. But if we're just talking about the norm here, in adolescence, it's very common, first of all, for adolescents to push both parents away, but also to want to be with one parent versus another for various reasons, right? Maybe they're modeling after one parent because they're more independent. Maybe they're modeling after one parent because they're more affectionate. But it's not abnormal for children to say, I want to be more with my daddy right now, or with my dad right now. So I always say secure parents make the best parents. So if you don't take it personally and you say, right, I'm here, I love you, I want, whenever you want to be here, I'm here. And I understand that right now it's important for you to be a little more with your dad or a little more with your mom. If you're a dad, you say to your kid, I understand it's more important for you to be with your mom, but I'm here. And I just need you to know that I always want you, and I want you whenever you want to come here. And that's the secure position. Yeah, that's the secure position. Again, it goes back to possession. He wants to be with my husband more. That's not fair. It's all about winning and fairness. Raising children isn't about winning, and it's not about fairness. There are times when a child will identify more with one parent than another. I mean, we could talk about it I could talk to you about Oedipal development for an hour, and how in sexual development very early, there's alliances, right? Alliances and romances and rejections. And this is all part of development. So the fact that in adolescence, first of all, adolescents reject both parents to create distance, to create separation, so they can individuate, so they can become their own person. But it's not in divorces. It is common for adolescents to choose one parent who they prefer to be with, and if you handle it securely, they say chickens come home to roost, or what was the old poster? If you love something, set it free. It doesn't mean you say, okay, you go to your dad's, I don't care, I don't want to be with you anyway. That's when parents do that, it's because they feel hurt and they feel narcissistically wounded that their child has chosen the other parent. Again, out of insecurity. A secure parent is a better parent.
Right. Well, I think, as you said, parenting guidance, I don't think a lot of people are aware. Just like what you said with babies, you have to maybe say what the babies are doing. I think the same thing for adults. We have these feelings, and maybe we need to go to some therapist to give us some awareness of why we feel that way. And that's a whole challenge. I was really surprised to learn in your field couldn't believe this, that they never used to see people in psychotherapy over 40, 75
Yeah.
years ago. And I'm just thinking,
Yeah.
I'm just getting started and you're cutting
Yeah.
it down at 40? Wow. So, yeah.
That was psychoanalysis because the belief was that you get stayed and stuck in your ways, but now we know differently.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. I mean, if you're feeling these overwhelming feelings, maybe get some awareness. That's what that seems to be the case. So it's interesting. So for the 9 to 13 stage, it doesn't necessarily mean we have to continue the 50-50. It could. But if the child is bonding more with one parent or the other, just like in the first 1,000 days, now we're going to put the children first. And for example, I've seen, let's say the child's really into hockey and one parent really is into that sport and they do all the traveling and everything, which, as you probably know, it can get really intense. So maybe they are with the other parent a lot.
Yeah, that's
You know,
right.
it's not 50-50. And then maybe after that period of time, it changes. So that's really interesting. It doesn't have to be, I thought it should be a presumption of 50-50, but it seems like what you're saying is it depends on their stage of development. And, even in stages where it could be 50-50, it might not necessarily be the best thing for the child. It's just a presumption. I always tell people presumptions can always be rebutted. And this is one thing you could rebut. So that's helpful for parents that in that 9 to 13 stage, it could revert maybe to the non-primary parent who probably,
That's right.
probably who now really developing, more of a relationship. I would say there's a lot of parents who feel more comfortable with older children. And I think there's some parents who feel more comfortable with younger children. So I think it's really working also to the parent's strength. But I do think if you have a parenting guidance expert or a parenting coordinator at this point, or even your own therapist, to really work through these issues, and even just literally reading your books, which is like basically going to a therapist and learning if you really want to take the time. So I think that's really helpful. I did want to ask about a couple little things in our closing time we have together. One thing I thought about, we talked about nesting, but here's something that comes up. We didn't talk about this. Introducing new romantic partners. That comes up a lot. And everyone says a certain bright line rule. So you're smiling already. You're probably going to say it depends or something. There's going to be some variable. I heard 6 months, a year. There is no bright line rule that I know of. So is there any? So there's no. So what would you say about that? And what should people know about this introduction of romantic partners? Because it really is a sore subject.
Yeah. So I think just remember that, again, introducing someone to a child who's been through a divorce is hard emotionally. And so there are things that children have to go through that are hard, meaning, adjusting to a new family member if you're bringing a significant other into the family. But you don't want to bring hardship into your children's lives unnecessarily, right? So you want to do it when it's necessary. And there are necessary times to introduce discomfort. And the idea is the reason that we encourage parents to wait until they feel committed to that person is you don't want to introduce too much loss to that child. You don't want to put them through the hardship of having to adjust to a new person because it is an adjustment and it is an emotional hardship, but albeit a necessary one at some point. But you don't want to do it unnecessarily. You don't want to induce loss or bring loss into their lives, because if you keep bringing girlfriends or boyfriends into your life and they get attached to them and then they lose them again, it's yet another major loss. So that's the reason we say, wait until you feel as an adult seriously committed to that person. Like, I'm going to be with this person for a long time. And then you introduce them to your child and go through the process of the hardship of introducing it. You just don't want to do it arbitrarily. You don't want to do it impulsively. You want to do it thoughtfully.
All right, well, let's maybe end our conversation with your new book that you're writing. I think you're in the process of a divorce book. You finally got around to where I am in the divorce world. So tell me about what it's going to be about. Is there any specific area? I'm assuming it's about children. Is it all the childhood, or where are you focusing on?
No, it's about all of childhood. So just like we're doing today, it breaks it down. Each chapter breaks it down into stages of development. So it really can apply to all parents going through divorce, whether you're talking about 0 or 17. We say 0 to 18, but, because that's when your children physically leave you and separate and go to college. But it's really in those years when they're home with you. How do you negotiate this so it's really best for your children? So you're building emotionally resilient children. There's no way to get around the hardship of divorce. Divorce is a hardship for children, and it's a loss, and it is a kind of trauma to them, but albeit again a necessary one, because I really believe that it's far better for children to go through a divorce if their parents have intractable conflict than to live in a constant state of conflict. And so, and that's changed over the years. So, so it's basically about raising healthy children in this environment of divorce.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to reading it. I felt like your other two books were great. I felt like I learned so much. And I love that concept of fragile to flexible, and that tree metaphor where we have to be bending in the wind and dealing with all this adversity. And also that story with the parents whose child, I think the child had to drive with an adult, and then the child didn't because of some emergency issue, and the parents were really stern. And then you work with them to realize that there can be exceptions. And I think that flexibility is, and not that rigidity, is so important in working with people in these difficult times. So I really appreciate all the work you're doing, Erica, and I thank you for taking the time out of your day to speak to me and having a conversation about this.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you for speaking to me.